Hello, everybody. I've got a little story to tell. It's about something that happened, a long, long time ago, at a dusty old crypt in Egypt. Now, doesn't that sound fun? I'm going to impart something to you all that's not generally talked about in your history books. No, sir. Now, I'm going to allude to some facts here that the powers that be would much sooner keep, well, let us say, under wraps and out of the public eye, as it were. Yeah, big shocker. They lied to you. But hey, we're all friends here. Not. So, without any further ado, I'm going to tell you a little story. So I'm going to stop beating around the bush and tell you it all from the very start. It all happened in Egypt, oh so long ago.
Good morning.
I don't want to alarm anyone, but I think I'm in the Matrix.
Indeed.
The chambers and the catacombs had not been disturbed in well over 1,000 years.
Maybe not, but I have.
Yet in a single instant, a shaft of light smashed through the pitch darkness, casting illumination, disconcerting to the eye. 3 faces emerged over the newly excavated entry point. The first was the profile of a thin, middle-aged man. The other 2 were no more than children. They peered over the edge, gazing into the long shaft that revealed a portion of the tomb. The eldest spoke first, in an Egyptian dialect. He was telling the 2 boys to prepare the ladder for descent. One of the boys scurried off, and came back a minute later with a length of rope and a wooded ladder. The man went down first, and then the oldest of the boys. The youngest stayed behind to keep watch. Once the 2 had reached the floor, a torch was lit, allowing them both a modicum of light as they breached the narrow passage that seemed to take them deeper into the underground catacombs. This cramped network eventually opened out into a room, a cavern, with what appeared to be many identical compartments or alcoves, all dug out along the walls, as well as several flights above, perforated and peppered as far as the moderate light allowed. It looked like a huge honeycomb. The man and the child allowed a moment to simply stand and gaze in awe at the sheer size of this ancient underground structure. It was a moment too long. The boy heard a sound and quickly turned to see what it was. The man heard it too and shifted his weight to see if he could see where the disturbance had originated. Surely there was no one else down here, and the third boy who they'd left on the surface knew better than to follow them. The noise came again. The boy was frightened and spoke urgently to his elder. The man sensed something in the darkness ahead of them and instantly thrust his torch out in front in a bid to protect himself and the boy. The boy slowly and steadily began to back away, his tiny face racked with a steady expression of trepidation that soon was replaced with terror. He let out a shriek that was deafening.
You see that right there? You see, that's just so full of no. No.
Morning.
It was heard above as the youngest boy shouted down into the obscure darkness below. Nothing. There was no reply after that. Looking down at his watch, he realized that the two who had gone down to investigate should have returned to the surface by this time. Instead of going down the hole himself, he decided to go back to the town and seek help. That is what the man would have wanted him to do. The nearby town was overrun with occupying German soldiers. A tavern at the entrance to this dusty burrow played host to the military vanguard, who had come not merely to enjoy the local entertainment, but more seriously, to rob this country of its ancient treasures. A tall, elegant man in a trilby hat sat with a member of Gestapo intelligence. He rested on a cane made from ivory and gestured at the girl, who danced for their pleasure. All attentions, however, were quickly drawn away from the center of the room as the boy burst in through the saloon doors, shouting in his native tongue. A number of the patrons looked at the child with irritation and disgust. A few of the staff who knew the boy ran over to try to turn him away. Though the man in the trilby hat stood up and said something in the native lingo. The boy came to him and began to explain what had happened. The man with the hat and ivory cane smiled and asked the boy if he would kindly take him and his friends to the place where all this had transpired. The boy agreed, and the man, along with a Gestapo intelligence officer, a number of soldiers, drove out via jeep into the desert. It was evening by this time, and the moon was already full in the sky. "We will have to wait for first light," suggested the man in the trilby hat. The Gestapo intelligence officer nodded his agreement. "Yes, but this looks like the very thing we came here to find, does it not?" The man with the ivory cane smiled. "We will return first light," and he turned and got back in the jeep, followed by the Gestapo representative and his guards. The boy just looked at them, puzzled as they drove off in a cloud of dust, leaving him there at this hole in the ground. He looked round at the hole. What had happened to his two friends, he wondered. Would he ever find out? It was past twilight in the desert, and there was a bustle of activity. Jeeps had brought equipment, and a small encampment was pitched along the perimeter of the underground tomb. Ladders and scaffolding were brought. Men in gas masks and full hazmat protection took shifts to explore the interior. The boy, who had spent the rest of that night waiting for his lost companions to return, stood at the man's side, eagerly waiting for answers, should any present themselves. The gentleman in the trilby hat rested on his ivory cane. waiting patiently for news. In the bowels of the tomb itself, the honeycomb chamber was revealed to the scientists and soldiers who had just entered that compartment. It was definitely lighter now, as each one of them had brought gas lamps. In each alcove that lined the walls, upon closer inspection, there appeared to be large, fossilized formations. Hard-surfaced objects that looked suspiciously like cocoons emerged as the torchlights illuminated the interior recesses. They were as big as fully grown men should they have been sitting in fetal positions. Every alcove presented at least one of these strange objects, and they were composed of living tissue. The chief scientist told two of his soldiers to take one of the cocoons above for analysis. This was done straight away. The remaining archaeologists explored further. Eventually, they found the man and the boy, or indeed, their bodies in any case. From the evidence, it was safe to conclude they had inhaled or touched something down here, which clearly they should have left well alone. There were signs of an infection. Excessive mucus around the nose and eyes, not to mention blood present around their mouths and on the ground, only reinforced this assertion. The investigation went further, deeper into the catacombs.
Can I ask you a question? Are you taking any drugs? If so, can I have some?
The man with the trilby hat was sitting in his tent, safely above ground, taking afternoon tea when the boy emerged, gesticulating excitedly to go look. The man threw his napkin down upon the plate before him, picked up his walking cane, and rose quickly to see for himself the commotion that had begun to stir. A mummy had been found. The mummy! Was it possible? Could this really have been the remains of the so-called heretic king? When the final light of day disappeared beyond the horizon, the partisans of the encampment went to sleep. Some of the German soldiers continued a vigil in order to keep the tomb safe from other raiders and would-be thieves. It was in the very late hour when something emerged from the hole in the ground. Something terrible and unseen. But it could be heard. It sounded like a low vibration or hum. It could be detected in the very narrow bandwidth, like it was composed mostly of sound and tone. It came upon one of the soldiers and entered through the man's skull, as if passing through air. The poor creature cupped his head with both hands as the entity began to scramble his brains, vibrating every recess and fiber as it passed unrestricted through his cortex. It was done. Cold and calculating. It was an act of preservation, no less. But this entity had done this thing many times before. It drove this poor man to perform its bidding. The soldier looked towards the hole, and swiftly he shifted his weight. He had been robbed of his thoughts, robbed of even the tiniest thread of consciousness. Something else was in charge of him now. Something more powerful was manipulating his actions. The soldier started to descend into the pit, slowly, unconsciously. It was as if he was sleepwalking, somnambulating into the darkness. He ambled beyond the points the scientists had designated unsafe. Beyond lay a small chamber, a larder filled with tiny ampules as well as cracked and dusty earthenware. In a moment, the soldier lifted a lid from one of the urns, removed a small glass vial from within. He raised the vial to his lips and imbibed its thick, black liquid. In a second, he felt his own consciousness flood back again. It was as if he'd been asleep and had suddenly woken. The entity left him, leaving confusion and a bitter aftertaste on his tongue. In a matter of seconds, the man was reduced to whimpering sounds and low guttural cries that were not heard by the others until morning.
We interrupt these shenanigans to give you a news flash.
Okay then, so what do we know so far?
I know I've got a bleeding headache.
Greetings, concerned citizens of the world. Permit me to bring you up to speed on where we are at present with our narrative. Last week we told the story of Amenhotep and how he reshaped theology and brought about the birth of his monolithic god, Aten-Ra. That idea invited the demon Teriesh to enter the young king's body, and there a new transformation occurred. Amenhotep and Teriesh merged body and mind to form a being known as Akhenaten. Akhenaten went on to produce a progeny known as the Archon's spawn. While Akhenaten slept for many centuries beneath the ruins and sands of time, his progeny were busy paving the way for his eventual return. While this was happening, the Archon progeny, who opted to remain with Akhenaten during his long slumber, went about phase 2 of their operation. While they remained buried in the ruins, these few Archon workers busied themselves creating 2 viral agents which could be incubated inside the body of their king as he slept. The first strain was an immunodeficiency virus similar to HIV and AIDS. The other virus that emerged was quickly manufactured as a thick black liquid and was then placed into various glass jars for future development and release onto an unsuspecting human population. During the 1940s, an expedition was undertaken by the German government to extract the 2 viral strains that had remained largely inert and dormant beneath the tomb of Akhenaten. They were brought to the attention of one Dr. Jonas Clein for full study.
June 11th, 1942. I saw the first body as it was shipped to us that morning. Cold and decayed, it lay on the gurney like some ancient mystery, waiting to be taken apart and studied. They told me there would be a wealth of knowledge that could be obtained from this single cadaver. It was the belief of my superiors that this was the remains of the pharaoh himself, the man the historians had dubbed the heretic king. But then my people believed so many legends and recognized that not all myths were pure fiction, but based on far deeper truths.
You know what? That German accent really does it for me.
Ich bin ein Moser.
The next gurney that was wheeled into my hospital carried a still living specimen, though a little worse for wear, I must add. He was a German soldier whom I had been told was under the influence and possession of some terrible curse. I, fortunately for my superiors, am a man of science, and I have never given myself to believing superstitions.
Bullshit!
When they brought him into the medical unit, I thought that maybe they were correct, and he was under some demonic influence. His eyes were piercing and full of rage. This soldier was strapped down on the gurney, more for our protection than for his, I would think. He was wild, full of animosity. I told the other soldiers who brought him in to set him down on the table so that I could conduct my tests. June 12th, 1942. Seriously, there is nothing this poor specimen can tell me, other than that he is a deeply disturbed and dangerous individual. Whatever this stricken man encountered at the dig site in Egypt, I can find no underlying catalyst for his odd behavior. As I told my superiors, I am neither a priest or a psychoanalyst.
What then? A stoned badger? A proctologist with a prosthetic hook? Throw me a bone here.
A complete examination of the man's blood work, however, did uncover some unusual activity of which I am not entirely certain yet. So I begin to concentrate on the more interesting specimen I am given, the mummified remains of the ancient man. I have no idea what this carcass is composed of. The anatomy is alien to me. The organs appear to be displaced. I should not have detected any existing blood cells within the body due to the level of time and decay. But there are definitely signs of fluid. Further analysis suggests that this fluid closely matches a type of ichor. Most interesting.
Well, he's one YouTube binge away from being a complete flat earther.
June 14th, 1942. We have conducted many tests. Still, we are far from scratching the surface. Curious. Yet, this corpse is clearly male. There is evidence of female reproductive organs. There are fluids here still, remnants of embryonic solutions. This should not be possible. Judging by how old this body is, there should be no fluids left at all. It is as though the outer body has turned to a dry, leathery consistency, yet has somehow managed to maintain a certain level of protection for the organs within. Fascinating. July 21st, 1942. Further tests concluded that certain fluids consists of a microbe organism, a parasite no less. This morning we took one of the human test subjects and infected them with the organism.
What? The absolute bastard!
Nothing. No sign of any symptoms at all. I discovered no physical traits of illness. August 29th, 1942. My first patient, the German soldier with the unusual blood work, has somehow freed himself from his restraints and has broken quarantine. Unfortunately, they have had to destroy him. Evidently inflicted by madness though he was, his loyalty to the fatherland as well as his service to medical science is proving to be invaluable. I continue to evaluate his blood work. Perhaps I will find something further, something wholly remarkable in all of this. September 10th, 1942. We have discovered, after all, rather interesting finds pertaining to the soldier's blood work. Curious mutations have occurred as a result of some pathogen within the blood, an organism that announces its presence by first attacking the host's T cells. It appears to absorb and then mimic T cells, leaving the host's body without a proper functioning immune system. Although this concept appears to imply immense strategic value initially, I would have to say that the possibility of weaponizing this pathogen is rather lagging, crude and therefore unsuitable. Maybe, given time, we may discover a viable use for such a pathogen. It is worth further study nonetheless. September 11, 1942. I would have to say at this point we are clearly dealing with two different strains of virus here. Two very pernicious causes that seem to work in conjunction with one another in order to fulfill a desired effect. The most fortunate aspect of working in the camps is that you are never short of a human test subject or more. I have taken 3 prisoners previously infected with the first strain to reduce immune response and place them in a holding area. Only one of the 3 subjects is injected with the second viral strain, the one that was extracted from the mummy that was found by my compatriots. I watch the progress of the human guinea pig as her cells go through a disturbing and fascinating mitosis. The infected skin of the patient is turning into a sort of hard casing, rather much like a cocoon or chrysalis. I watch with anticipation for the end result.
Yo, Doc, would you be good enough to cure my raging knob rot? Yeah, it's getting a bit out of hand.
September 28th, 1942. What emerged from the cocoon are 2 perfect duplicates of the original base template. Only what appears to be 2 perfect doppelgangers show little sign of the infection. I can barely believe the evidence before my eyes. They are perfect copies of the individual we infected with the second disease over 2 weeks ago, and 2 very healthy specimens to be sure. Though they are incredible replicas, they seem to be both totally clean slates. What I mean to say is, they resemble golems in truth. Between the twinned specimens there is no dialogue, no resemblance to the individuality that made the original template unique. They are 2 perfectly mirrored forms, without a soul as it were. I reserve these biological finds for further study.
One pathogen is designed to destroy the immune system of its host, while the other remains free to rewrite the host's DNA. This is by design, make no mistake. The victim dies and is rejuvenated inside a cocoon. 2 identical copies of the late victim emerge mere weeks later. The purpose behind this study? Why? That will be revealed later. Until then, stay alert. Control the virus.